Hi, everyone. We're really excited that you're here. We are starting our virtual seminar for this month of October. It is called Book Writing with the Boss, Orphans Court Updates. So we're here with Samantha, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the book writing process. As always, we offer initial consultation. You can call our office at 717-655-2676, or you can also email Amy. It's meek@skwlawoffice.com. So we're going to go ahead and get started and talk to Sam about her writing. And so, Sam, you write a book called The Pennsylvania Trust Guide, which is right back here. Right, it's this one right here. And you also write a book called Remick's Pennsylvania Orphans Court Practice, which is this stack here. Yes. So this stack has been around. This book of set of volumes has been around for a long time. And what they do is an attorney updates it annually with the case law updates related to the orphans court practice. So although it's all of these books, what the author's job is to insert case laws under the specific heading. So for example, Orphans Court, there's a section dealing with wills. And so my job is, if any cases have come out related to wills or will contests or how to execute a will or admit it to probate, I select those cases and I'll do a summary and then insert it in that specific section of the book, so that way any attorney in Pennsylvania or anybody who has this volume of books can get the updated case laws related to each of the topics covered in the Orphans Court practice. Okay. So what exactly is Orphans Court? So Orphans Court deals with all kinds of things. So just to kind of know, here at our office, we do a small part of Orphans Court practice. So we do powers of attorneys, we do wills, and we do trusts here. All of that falls under Orphans Court, which just means that if there'd ever be litigation, the court in which is going to hear the case and decide it is going to be the Orphans Court of whatever county. So we have like Franklin County Orphans Court here. So it covers wills, it covers powers of attorneys, it covers trusts. All of those we do here at our office, but it also covers other areas of law that we don't do, that we typically refer out to our other partners and colleagues. So some of those other things are things like adoptions. The other thing it covers would be guardianships. So those are the two big areas that we here at our office don't do. We refer those out to those who practice more regularly in that area. But those two topics are also included in the Orphans Court practice. So I'll read those cases, even though I don't practice in it, I still update it and insert it in the specific volumes where it's needed. So it's a very broad bunch of broad topics. Correct. Now you aren't going to find things like Orphans Court practice isn't going to cover anything criminal. So there's not going to be like any homicide cases, assault cases, all of that would be considered criminal. So that's not going to fall under the Orphans Court. So Orphans Court would be anything that would be related to wills, powers of attorneys, trusts, guardianships, adoptions. Those are kind of the big areas that it covers. Okay. So what does the writing process entail? What do you need to do for that? Well, the good news is that both of the books do kind of work well together. So the Pennsylvania Trust Guide is specific to trust law in Pennsylvania. But because trust law also falls under the Orphans Court practice, I'm able to take those same cases that I would put in the Trust Guide and then also update them in the Orphans Court volumes. So it is kind of nice that they overlap a little bit. Now, the Pennsylvania Trust Guide only covers trusts and Pennsylvania law related to trusts. So that one is very specific. It's like the Pennsylvania Trust Guide is a very specific topic that is also included in the Orphans Court. So what I do for the Trust Guide is I'm looking specifically for those cases related to trust in Pennsylvania. And then I will do a case summary of everything that's come out about trust law in the last year. But for Orphans Court, what I'm doing is I'm looking for cases that would all fall under Orphans Court jurisdiction. So that's where, like we talked about, any cases dealing with powers of attorneys. For example, there was a case about a power of attorney was executed, naming a child as an agent. And the questions were, could the agent be making certain transfers that they made using the power of attorney? And there was a court case about it. So what I'll do is I will read it, and then try to extract the important legal concepts that were in the case so the other attorneys don't have to read the whole case. Maybe they can just read the excerpts that I pull out that would be important to their everyday practice. So it is a little bit different writing between the two books. One, I'm doing a much more in-depth summary. That's the trust guide where all the facts, all the analysis that the court used. And with the Orphans Court volume, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of taking little tidbits from each case, or I may have multiple paragraphs that I'm inserting in different sections of the Orphans Court because it might apply to different sections. So one is more broad in its coverage, the Orphans Court. So when I'm writing, it's a little bit more like little nuggets that you're sprinkling all throughout the volumes, where the trust guide is truly a summary of the case that is then put into the trust guide. Okay. Does that make sense? Yes. And I know you talked a little bit about the case summaries, but what exactly are they? What's the purpose, and where do you even find them? So every county has an orphans court. So here we're in Franklin County, but there's Dauphin County, Cumberland County, York County, all of them. And so all of these courts are hearing cases simultaneously. So why it's helpful is because I down here myself in Franklin County might have a question about whether or not I should use this language in my power of attorney. And there might have been a court case in York County Orphans Court that addressed that specifically. And so it's really helpful because I practice in Franklin County, I may not get all the court opinions in other counties. So that's my job, is to say, okay, of all the orphans court across Pennsylvania, let's pull out the cases that would apply to practitioners no matter what county they're in. So it can be fun. You can have some where they issue multiple decisions about one topic. It could be where you don't get anything from that orphans court that you would think would be worthy of putting it in either the trust guide or in the orphans court practice. So again, it kind of depends every year. Sometimes there's a lot from the one specific county, and sometimes it's a whole bunch from a whole bunch of different counties. Okay. And you can just pull them online, or if people would be interested in reading them, would they have access to those? So when I'm writing, I always have to cite the court case that I'm referencing. So if you would be reading the book, there would be a footnote saying what the case name is and where you can find it. So attorneys could find it on their, usually attorneys are subscribing, or under Pennsylvania bar, you can get access to a directory to you can search all the cases if you know the specific site for it. So attorneys can pull it that way. The way that I typically do it is that there is a law firm that does the fiduciary reporter, which is issued every couple of months. They'll issue it, and it gives, again, orphans court opinions from across Pennsylvania. And then I get that from my publisher, and then I do the summaries to put it into each of the books. So that's how I typically get access to them. Sometimes they'll not have been included in the fiduciary reporter. So for example, one case that I was involved in a couple of years ago, I don't do a lot of litigation, but I had done the trust drafting. And so I knew that this case was happening. And although the decision was not included in the fiduciary reporter, because I was familiar with the case, I included it. So I try to do a summary of everything that's in the fiduciary reporter, but then I'm also trying to make sure there are no cases that were left out that somebody might find important. That makes sense. So I've gotten to see firsthand the amount of time that it takes, lots of weekends, lots of evenings in the office, things like that, to write these books. Mm-hmm. Is it something that you enjoy and will continue doing? So I enjoy writing. So I know I've probably talked to a lot of clients about this, but I was a journalism undergrad major. So law school was I loved writing, and it allowed me a great avenue to continue to write. Client service and meeting with clients, representing them, doing their estate planning is always going to be our number one priority here at this office. But I do enjoy the writing, and I do think it's really important for our clients. So I think that me being able to keep up on all the court cases that are coming out of all the orphans courts across Pennsylvania, keeping track of all the trust law cases that come out and any updates, I think that benefits our clients because they're being up to date, during appointments when I'm talking about things, I'm able to say, well, this is something that just came out, or this is how it might play out if something were to happen. So I think it's invaluable to our clients in that way. It's a nice avenue for me to be able to do something other than draft documents and meet with clients. So I feel like it fulfills a different goal that I have maybe. So usually I try to block off sometime every week. Sometimes that means Saturdays. Sometimes it might mean that we have a lighter day throughout the week, maybe just not as many client appointments that day, or somebody cancels. And so I'm writing or doing a case summary here and there. And then sometimes over the summer, we have some really great interns that will come into the office and do case summaries for me. So for example, last summer we had a legal intern, John Masters, who came in and he helped me with a lot of case summaries. For some people, it's probably boring because it's just reading and doing summaries. But if you enjoy doing it, which I know I did and I know John did, it's a great way to be able to keep up on the research, and it forces you to keep up on the research. So I enjoy doing it. I think that it just adds another dimension to our practice here.
Yeah. I think you listed a lot of pros and cons, like keeping up with everything clients know, but also it does take a lot of time and enjoying it. I know that's something that I would not enjoy. Like it would have to really grab my attention in order to want to be able to continue to write about it. But at least that's up your alley and what you enjoy doing.
Yes. I would say the only negative is that both books, there are deadlines. I have to submit a manuscript, and this year they were a week apart. Now, like I said, there is some overlap with the content, but it's still, you're putting it in a different format and you're inserting it at different places and highlighting different aspects of the cases. So having the deadlines that close was a little bit challenging, but the reason why I think it was more challenging this year is because this was the first year that I wrote the Orphans court practice updates. So now that I kind of know I'm going to be doing it, I'm going to be working on it all throughout the year, as opposed to just a couple of months, like March, I think, to July is where I really focused, because I knew I had to write it. So now I know I'm going to be writing for next year. So anytime that the cases are coming out, I'm going ahead and doing summaries as I go. So it's a little bit less work that way. It's not less work. It's just that it's spread out over a longer period of time.
That makes sense. Yeah, because the binders, like after you're finished writing that I help you scan, are like the 3-inch ginormous binders, and there's 4 or 5 of them. So
So in the Orphans court practice, again, every page for them is a paragraph, and it might be saying like, this is one point that the case brought out, and you do a page for each of those to insert them into the Orphans court practice. So I think it ended up being close to 200 pages is what I wrote. Now it's not the full page because it's usually a paragraph or 2 or maybe 3 on each page, but that's why it gets so many pages. There's so much volume there.
Okay. So why would you really need an orphans court? Like, kind of break it down in layman's terms. What would we need this for?
Yes. So everyday people aren't going to need to go out and run and buy the Orphans court practice. I mean, as much as you'd love to pour over and read it, you probably don't need to get your own copy. But it's important for attorneys. It's important for accountants. It's important for anybody attached to the legal aspect of things. So, for example, my guess is if you were to ask most attorneys that practice in this area, they probably have one or both of these books or volumes, because it allows them to go and research it. Now, most of the time they're going to have it electronically, because now we can access them on electronically. The only reason I have the hard copy is because it makes it easier when I'm writing to figure out where to insert it, if I can flip through the book and find the actual topic. But most people are going to find this too boring, too drab to want to read. Might be a good bedtime read, put you right to sleep. But most people aren't going to run out and get these. These aren't like a crime thriller or a good romance novel. But it's important for those of us that practice in the law to have a place we can go to get all of the updates. So, and like I said, I just think it's been really helpful for me to then, when I'm talking to clients, to explain maybe some of the negatives about some of the decisions they're making based on what we've seen in either Franklin County or across the Orphans Court of all of Pennsylvania. And again, Orphans Court is just covering those specific areas, certain areas of practice.
things like trust, wills, powers of attorneys. So for example, if you had a will contest and it got to the point where there was a trial and you were presenting the facts, that would be in orphans court. And you'd go before the orphans court judge, argue why you think it should be awarded to you. And then the judge would decide, and then you could appeal it, and that would go to the superior court. So the orphans court would be where everything gets hashed out. And usually that's only going to be in situations in which an estate or maybe a power of attorney can't get along. There's some sort of conflict between the parties and somebody has to resolve it. Then you're going to go before the orphans court in order to be able to resolve it.
Okay. And I do get why attorneys would need it, but you had mentioned accountants. Why would they need to have anything like this?
Yes. Well, so I was working with an accountant in Williamsport, and she was doing a tax return for a trust. And she wanted it because, at least in the Pennsylvania Trust Guide, we talk a lot about the taxation of trust, the different ways that a trust can be taxed, and how to determine what type of trust it is. And we do have some forms in that in the Pennsylvania Trust Guide too. So she wanted a copy, and I gave her a copy that I had. She wanted a copy because it's like a reference guide. So even though she doesn't practice law in the area of trusts, she does do tax returns. And so just like with anything, sometimes you have good attorneys, sometimes you have bad attorneys, or it could be the best attorney in the world, but an accountant just might not have the knowledge or the experience dealing with trust. And so they may want the Pennsylvania Trust Guide as more of a reference guide. Sometimes we see like bank trust officers, they want it as well. So, or, it could be a law school is using that as the curriculum for their class, their law school class.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So it can come in all different areas. Again, not normal people. They're going to read interesting things, but for those of us that practice in this area, it would be important.
So the people that really want to run out and buy these books and like read them and put themselves to sleep, where would they even go about finding this?
Yeah, so it's going to be through the publishers. Okay. So George T. Beistel publishes the Pennsylvania Trust Guide, and then Remick's Orphans Court, they have two publishers. So you go through the publisher's website. If there's anybody who's watching this that really feels the need to want to hunker down and read these books, I can certainly send them a direct link. Or even, we do have copies from previous years. So if somebody would want to borrow it to read it or look at something, they're always welcome to do that.
I'm glad you're here so I don't have to do it.
I think it would be a great bedtime story. Maybe we should open every staff meeting reading a book.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So kind of tell us some of the most interesting cases or interesting things you've seen so far this year.
Yeah. So I know when you had said we're going to try to pick out a couple of cases to talk about, the ones that I have the most fun reading are always the ones that seem the most ridiculous. So for example, there were two cases that came out this year, and you have to realize that there's always a delay when you're going through the court system. So I know that COVID is now hopefully in our rear view a couple years now, but we're just starting to get some of the cases coming through the court system. So there were two cases in two different counties. So every county can decide something different. The reason why it's important to know what each county is deciding is because as it appeals, it gets smaller and smaller. So you might have 15 orphans court and every court could decide something different. But when you appeal it to the superior court. There's only so many superior courts in Pennsylvania. You don't like that decision, then you appeal it to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. So it's important to know what other counties are doing, because then for example, Franklin County could then take that and apply it to a certain set of facts they have, or they could do it completely different because maybe the judge feels differently about it. So the two that were the most interesting was, and they both deal with COVID, and they both deal with not ridiculous circumstances. I think circumstances that everybody knows because they had somebody that had this or they heard about it on the news. So the first one was an individual who was in a hospital. They had gotten a cancer diagnosis, and at that point in time, the hospitals were on lockdown. So nobody was able to get in or out of the hospital. So in that case, the individual contacted her attorney and asked for a will to be drafted. Was very clear about what she wanted the provisions to be, actually spoke to the attorney. It was just the attorney that was on the call. Nobody else was in the room with her. So it was very clear that this is what the individual wanted in their will. So the attorney drafted it, but because the hospitals you couldn't get into, the attorney couldn't get in to see the individual. And unfortunately, and understandably, I will say this, hospitals, it used to be sometimes they'd have a notary or they would have nurses or staff that would be willing to serve as witnesses. And because they were so busy during that time and continue to be so busy, they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to serve as witnesses and they were able to serve as notary. So you have this individual who can't get to the attorney to sign it, and the attorney can't get into the hospital to sign it. And unfortunately, in that case, she passed away before she could sign the will. And so in Pennsylvania, if you don't have a will, there's intestate law that says how your estate should be divided. And in that case, the executor felt like, hey, we have this draft of this will. It was made clear that she was wanting to sign it because after she had received a copy of it via email, she called the attorney, indicated that this is what her wishes were. But because she didn't sign it, that was the issue. And so it went through the court system about whether or not they could honor it. And again, every orphans court can decide something different. Now, we ran into this. Thankfully, we were able to work around it in most of the situations. So because we practice here in Waynesboro, we're right near the Waynesboro Hospital. And we did have one client who needed to sign their will. One was in the hospital in ICU. The other was in a nursing facility. At the time, both were on lockdown. We couldn't get into either. So what we had to do is for the nursing home couple, we mailed them a hard copy of their wills. The facility kept it in a quarantine for so long, the pages that we had sent, and then they delivered them to the resident's room because everybody had to stay in their room at that time. So they delivered the wills, and then the individuals signed and dated them at that time. And in Pennsylvania, it doesn't require a notary and two witnesses. You can sign your will and that be all. It creates some issues when you're trying to probate, because then you have to have two witnesses to say, yes, this is this individual's signature, but you can sign a will and have it be valid without a notary and witness. So that's how we handled the nursing home. With the hospital, I had actually contemplated having my dad, this is how crazy it was, bring a ladder over to the hospital so that I could climb it and look in the window and watch them sign. It ended up that we didn't have to do that again, we were able to do something where the individual signed it. And then after the restrictions lifted, thankfully, neither of those situations did the individual die. So then what we did is then we immediately went to the nursing home and had them re-sign with two witnesses and a notary. But had they passed away in that time, that will would have been valid and it would have been fine. So that was one case.
So what happened, like with the first case you brought up, was that ever resolved? Could they use the will that the lady originally?
Okay. No, because Pennsylvania law says that it has to be signed. So, and this is going to kind of segue into another topic that I'll get to, but the second case was even more interesting. So in the second case, same situation. The individual was in a facility. The facility was on lockdown at the height of the COVID pandemic. Same thing, reached out to the attorney. He may have even met with the attorney before the lockdown had happened. So it was very clear what the individual wanted. Their wishes was very clear. And she ended up getting, I believe, a terminal diagnosis as well. And they were afraid that she was going to pass away. So they did a remote witness and notarization of the will. So it was considered an electronic will or an e-will in Pennsylvania. And so she passed away. And the executor admitted the electronic will for probate. Now, a couple of things to know. Nobody was contesting it. Everybody was agreeing with what the will said. And the only reason that it was going through the court system is because it was an electronic signature. So technically at the bottom of the will, when you do an electronic signature, it was like a number that was assigned to that signature. And so the individual's not actually writing their name on it. And so it was admitted to probate, and the Register of Wills denied admitting that to probate. They said it was not a valid will because there was no signature at the end. Now, remember, Pennsylvania during that time was crazy about could you do it electronically? Could you not do it electronically? They had some emergency orders about it. But in that case, based on the timing of when it was signed and the fact that the decedent did not put their ink signature on it, they did not admit it to probate. It got appealed. And the courts have agreed so far through all the appeals that that's not a valid will. So again, even though nobody was contesting it, everybody was on board with admitting this electronic will into probate, the court system wouldn't honor that. So that's interesting to me. And it's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. So the first is that we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're all kind of struggling with how we're coping with it. So that was my one issue, is that if nobody's contesting it, why do we care? But in the defense of the Register of Wills in the court system, the Pennsylvania statute says that a signature has to be affixed at the end. So they're following what Pennsylvania law is. They're not doing anything incorrect by not admitting it. So interestingly, I'm part of the elder law section of the Pennsylvania Bar, and they've decided that we should work with another section, real property probate, to come up with a bill that would go through Pennsylvania legislature and hopefully get enacted that would allow for electronic wills. The thought being, and this court case said it specifically, that if Pennsylvania wants to allow electronic wills, then there needs to be a statute in Pennsylvania that permits it. So I just thought it was interesting that as I'm working through this, I'm on a task force about electronic wills, that this case came out, and I'm summarizing it and talking about it. And at the same time, we're trying to come up with legislation in Pennsylvania that would allow for an electronic will. So I could talk all afternoon about all the cases, but those were just kind of the two interesting ones that I thought, because it was based on an event where nobody really had any control over what's happening and just how the court systems are reacting to it. Know that it's not the court system's job to make the law. That's the guys in Harrisburg, or the women in Harrisburg, the legislators. So what they have to do is they have to read the law and determine whether or not it meets the requirements. And so their stance right now in most orphans court across Pennsylvania, the other interesting thing is there was a orphans court in Pennsylvania that did allow an electronic will to be admitted. So we have two different results based on the court systems that the different families were involved in. So the goal here in Pennsylvania is to have the law apply uniformly across all orphans courts and in all situations. So hopefully we'll see some resolution of that issue over the next year. It'll be interesting to see if we see more court cases that are coming out after COVID related to that. But those are the two that the last two that I summarized for the orphans court practice.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like it's a tug and pull because you see both sides of it.
Well, of course. And if nobody's objecting to it and everybody's okay with it being administered that way, then it seems silly that we can't just administer that way.
Right.
But the court's job is to oversee and make sure that Pennsylvania laws are being applied in the correct manner.
Right.
So, it's not surprising that we got two different results.
Right.
It's just interesting to me that there were different results.
Yeah. Well, thanks for kind of sharing things about it, showing us what all the work entails in the books back here, and just taking time to share some of the cases that you kind of went through and read about. If anybody's interested in hearing any more, has questions for Sam more specifically than we covered today, or you'd like to read some cases or something, reach out. Our number is 717-655-2676. You can email Amy, meek@skwlawoffice.com. Next month on November 2nd, we are doing our next monthly virtual seminar. It is called What's to Do About Deeds, Difference in Titling and What It Means for Estate Planning. So I think it'll be a good one. You might want to tune in, hear about deeds, kind of what the difference is, the importance of deeds, the importance of having spouse versus kids, and all of that good stuff. So you can register with Amy. She'll send out some emails and reminders, but you don't want to miss that one. So Sam, thanks for kind of walking us through, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your month, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.